The year is 1934. Turmoil brews in Europe and Asia. Depression ravages America. The world stands on the brink of the most devastating war mankind has ever known. Upon this forbidding backdrop, a small ragtag band of unlikely heroes traverse the globe as they search for fortune, fame, glory, or at times even a way to save the world. The Empire Club.
Hello and welcome to the amazing adventures of the Empire Club. Today we're going to be talking about episode 3, The Hands of Woe.
Whoa! 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 Whoa!
All right, and so we begin. When we last left off, we had our cliffhanger. The members of the Empire Club had blown up the tunnel of the new construction in the New York subway, which was a replica of the tomb of the mummy Orthos Ra. The heroes escaped the deadly explosion, except for Benedict Grey, and we pick up there. As Benedict was about to be crushed under the rubble of the tunnel, two hands took hold of his head and pulled him to safety. Benedict awoke to find that his savior was none other than the Crimson Wraith herself, Juliette Dupont. The torpid Texan was instantly smitten. Now, this, I think, is where we first start to see the rivalry between Max Galahad and Benedict Grey starting to be the foundation for it being laid here, right? Because I think you and Tom both built your characters, both played by the same actor. Who was it? Not Glenn Campbell. Bruce Campbell. I say Glenn Campbell. And you both built your characters with the rivalry, and you opted to make it a romantic rivalry. You were both after Juliette Dupont, right? So do you have any recollection of that?
Typical of those kind of stories, though, back then. I mean, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, did you and Tom, did you discuss that during character generation? Did you both, you must have, right? Or did you just, maybe you both discovered that you built your characters with rivalry and maybe you hadn't thought it through and then thought, hey, why don't we...
I think it's the second one. We had just thought we'd had a rival, but we didn't really work it out, but then it just kind of worked out in the game, I believe.
That's
fantastic. I don't think there was any
fantastic.
real plan there. Yeah.
That's really fantastic. I love that. All right. Benedict, Juliette, and Lord Merryweather rejoined Max and Kara as the prince slowly stirred, remembering little save being under Orthos Ra's hypnotic influence. The prince begged the group to protect him from the devil himself, and insisted they bring him back home immediately. Suddenly, Kara began to feel another presence in the room. Reaching out with her psychic abilities, she discovered an aged Asian man in a suit, utilizing his own psychic powers to spy on them. Before Kara could act, a third eye opened up on the old man's forehead, and he muttered, "How interesting, a Salumbari." All right, now, there's a lot going on in this paragraph. This was a very dense part of our story. So, Orthos Ra's hypnotic influence, we may recall from the last episode, we gave chase, we the heroes, the player characters, gave chase after the mummy when after dealing with the chaos inside the museum, the scorpions and everything. And we went outside to chase the mummy, and there was this car chase, taxi cab. I think my character grabbed a horse.
Somebody was on horseback, too. Yeah.
Yeah, that was Heathcliff. Yeah, I was living out my Indiana Jones fantasy. And then we discovered in the episode that you ran, which was last episode, that there was the old switcheroo, the old identity switcheroo, a very common trope in the pulps. And that the mummy that we were chasing wasn't the Orthos Ra mummy, it was a decoy. And so there was some language in the summary of the last episode that we discovered that the mummy was not Orthos Ra, but a servitor, and that it was in the thrall of King Fuad's son, Prince Farouk. Well, here we find out that Prince Farouk himself was under the hypnotic influence of Orthos Ra. So Orthos Ra was influencing Prince Farouk with these sort of psionic abilities, psychic abilities, hypnotic abilities, and that Prince Farouk had exercised those same powers over a duplicate that we thought was Orthos Ra. So the prince then realizes that he's under the influence of this, who he calls the devil, Orthos Ra, the real Orthos Ra, and insists that everybody brings him back to Egypt because, we're these globe-trotting adventurers. So that's what that's a reference to. Now, what do you... this was Tom. Tom was running this episode.
I was running my character back again.
And you were so that's why Juliet pulls Benedict out of the rubble, and then Benedict is there, but he's just like still sore, still stunned from the rubble, and he doesn't do much in this adventure. So it's you and Cara and Lord Merryweather and Juliet really are the main actors here. So the paragraph goes on that now Cara begins to feel another presence in the room, and now we're not just developing the other aspects of Benedict, but now we're starting to develop the other characters a little bit more. And I think this is really where, in episode 3, is where Cara, her psychic abilities become the center of the story. So she reaches out with her psychic abilities and discovers an aged Asian man in a suit utilizing his own psychic powers to spy on them. Now, there's so much here that it kind of blows my mind. So I am in awe. If all of this was purposeful, and it may well be, if all of this is purposeful, Tom is extremely erudite, because what we've got the aged Asian man utilizing his own psychic powers to spy on Cara while she is reaching out with her psychic powers. So I talked about this in, I think it was an episode of Grognards of Gaming when we talked about the running the evil game or the dark side game. And Nietzsche's statement from his 1886 book Beyond Good and Evil in chapter 4, where he writes, "Whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster. If you gaze long enough into an abyss, the abyss will gaze back into you." And this is so profound because it's, it's moral philosophy by Nietzsche, and it's reflected in fiction time and again. We see it in The Lord of the Rings when, they look into the scrying stone and Sauron is looking back. And here it is. Tom brings it in. This was before the Lord of the Rings movies came out. I mean, the novels had been out and we had all read them. But
I'm pretty sure Tom would have read The Lord of the Rings.
Oh, most definitely. Sure yeah. And if not, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised that he had read Nietzsche, or at least he had seen this trope enough that he recognized it as a trope and introduced it here, because Cara, this is the third adventure where Cara is using her psychic abilities, and it looks to me like Tom wanted to put a little bit of a cost on it. And that's what he did here. And so then he says that the third eye opened up in the old man's forehead, and he muttered, "How interesting, a Salumbari." Now, Salumbari, I've always wondered whether that was a real thing or that was just something that Tom plucked out of the air. And I didn't really research it until I was preparing for this podcast. I finally sat down and I said, I'm going to do some proper research and see what the Salumbari is. And I think that, the word exists. It exists in 2 languages, but neither of them really seem like they were a source for Tom. So in the Minangkabau language, which is an Indonesian language, the word Salumbari, or it could also be rendered as Salembari, it means 2 days ago. Okay? And in the Kokborok language, which is a Tibeto-Burmese language of India, it means Saturday, as far as I can tell. Although it doesn't mean Saturday if the word stands alone. It means Saturday if there are numbers after it, like Saturday the 22nd or something like that. So it's kind of strange, and I don't speak either of those two languages, and Tom didn't either, as far as I know. And I don't think that any of those translations really have enough significance. Although it is interesting that they're both Eastern languages. One is Tibeto-Burmese and the other is Indonesian. So at least Tom was clever enough to pick up on the phonemes of Far East languages to put together a word, to make up a word that reflected this kind of Middle Eastern, Far Eastern mysticism. And he uses the term Salumbari as a name for a kind of a shadowy cabal of mystics, like the Order of the Black Star from the old pulps, The Black Star, which was written by Johnston McCulley, who everybody knows as the author of Zorro. But McCulley also had a serial before Zorro. He never intended Zorro to be a serial, but it ended up being very popular, and he made it into one. But before he had Zorro, he had the Black Star, and the Black Star and Zorro are actually somewhat similar. They both dress in black, and so on and so forth. So it's one of those. That's a trope, the shadowy cabal of mystics, and the Salumbari was supposed to be that. Do you have any recollections or thoughts on all of this, or what did you do with it as we went on, or how were you envisioning it as you were hearing it?
I don't remember where he got that from. I just kind of accepted the word because it sounded right.
Right.
And that may be very well how he put it together, is that it was just something that he wanted, a mystical group that he wanted to give a name to, and it just sounded right. So I always felt it sounded a little like some somnambulist kind of.
Like sleepy and dreamy. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, or put people to sleep or into a trance. But I don't know where he got the word from. We'll maybe have to shoot him an email and find out if he had a reference to the word or not. If he knew where he was referencing the word from. Right. That's an interesting.
Yeah, that's an interesting folk etymology. I never thought of that. The somnambulance. But that could be. Maybe he was crafting a word that was evocative of that. Anyway.
Yeah.
So back to the story. So borrowing the stunt plane, the Bellerophon, from Max's old buddy Sammy Palermo, the group prepared to take Prince Farouk back to Egypt. Suddenly, a cadre of policemen set upon them with deadly force. During the ensuing battle, the group discovered that as each policeman fell unconscious, he reverted back to his original form, that of an ancient Mongol warrior. Amidst the confusion, Kara encountered the old man, who revealed himself as Professor Wo Feng, an incredibly long-lived psychic who had seen a vision of his beloved Asia destroyed by a sun dragon. Feng beseeched Kara to help him stop this catastrophe, but she resisted, despite his promise that he would not harm her or Prince Farouk. So Wo Feng, or Wo Feng, as we used to call him, but actually in Mandarin Chinese, if that's what that name is supposed to be, because again, this is Tom's creation, would be pronounced Wo Feng. Although interestingly, Jason never corrected us, nor did he pronounce it Wo Feng. He just went along with our Wo Feng pronunciation. Anyway, again, another really dense part of the game, because a lot happens here that really affects the rest of our campaign. So let's begin with the Bellerophon. So the Bellerophon.
It was our Millennium Falcon.
It was our Millennium Falcon. I'm a little shocked to see that it first appears in the hands of Woe, which is episode 3, run by Tom, because that was part of your character concept. It was actually Sammy Palermo's plan. Why don't you tell us about Sammy Palermo and the Bellerophon and the build of Max Galahad and what they had to do with the build of Max Galahad?
I believe, didn't we talk about Sammy being, or was that just simply my sidekick? Because I know I was trying to make something that was a little like Tales from the Gold Monkey, which has a sidekick who's kind of an alcoholic. He limps. He's kind of his co-pilot / engineer that's played by, I can't think of the character actor who plays it, but he's also in he's in a few of the he ends up
Ladies and gentlemen, you're seeing it in real time. Jonathan's superpower and his super weakness. He cannot think of actors' names. Meg Ryan.
No. So he was in the TV show with Tom Selleck,
Magnum PI?
Magnum PI. There was a character, but he played the same guy I'm thinking of, plays a minor character in Magnum PI too. But he is supposed to be like that same type of Sammy Palermo kind of character who's a really good mechanic, but he's just had a bad life and
okay.
You know.
So Sammy, I mean, I think you came up with the Bellerophon before we even started the game, no? Or that was...
No, I did, but I remember coming up with it, but I think as a group we sort of fleshed it out. I don't think somebody drew up, and was it Hardy? You know what?
I don't think so.
I'm wondering if this wasn't something from actually even the previous game.
Right. No, I don't think it was.
I remember somebody drawing an image that was on the side of the Bellerophon. Something like the goat or whatever the mythical figure is supposed to be, that kind of trails down through the circle that's around it, and it was supposed to be drawn on the side of it. And I thought maybe Hardy LaBelle had done that. So I'm kind of wondering if the Bellerophon might have actually been from before that. By the way, the Bellerophon is actually something that's used, and I may have gotten the name from the Bellerophon is the name of the ship in the Forbidden Planet that originally goes to the planet. It's the ship that has the research group and on it that ends up crashing or ends up getting destroyed before it leaves the planet. And they never show it, but they talk about it. So I may have gotten the name from Forbidden Planet.
That makes sense, because the name is definitely a Bensley name. It's not from the Bensley-O-Matic, the name O-Matic, but it's definitely it's your style of naming convention, because it's evocative of Greek mythology, like Max Galahad and who's your other Jack Percival, and then the Bellerophon. So so I don't doubt that you came up with a name for the vehicle. It probably did appear in the original Alt Earth incarnation of this game. Hardy probably...
There was a point where a character, you guys, I think it actually may have been, because I think Manny was playing a pilot character in that. I know you land on a mysterious island that has some Cthulhu-like mythos thing that's going on it. And that may very well have been the plane that we kind of harkened back to. But then we added Sammy as his sidekick and maybe even owner of the plane. I'm not sure. But Sammy comes into it. I thought you came up with the name Sammy Palermo for some reason.
Well, I may have, but you definitely came up with the character. And you may have called him Sammy, and maybe we didn't have a last name for him, and at some point, maybe not here, well, obviously here, because I wrote the summary, although I might have written these summaries long after the fact. I don't recall. But the surname may have come later, and I may have suggested Palermo, which is in Sicily. So I imagined Sammy. We were narrating him with like a New York accent, like hey, Maxie, oh hey, and so I gave him, if I gave my input as to a surname, I might have suggested Palermo, but I actually think you came up with Palermo. I think that you came up with Sammy Palermo, the whole name, the character, the airplane. It's just a question in my mind as to how much of that was developed before the game and how much of it happened in the midst of the game. It's just surprising to me, although, I don't write down every detail when I do these summaries. I can't, otherwise they'd be 10 paragraphs long. But it's just surprising to me that the name Sammy and the name Bellerophon don't appear until episode 3, which is run by Tom, and not in an earlier episode run by you. But it's possible they were there, they were mentioned, they were in the background, and because they weren't really serving the crux of the story at the time, I didn't bother to put them in the summary. But Sammy ends up becoming, not to spoil it, I don't want to say too much about this, but Sammy ends up becoming a player character later on in this campaign and so forth. So, and
you play him a little bit. Yeah, you play him, don't you? Yeah, right. You play him. Yeah, that's
exactly right. He becomes my player character, and then so then we've also got finally the reveal of the name of this mysterious Asian figure, and it's Professor Wo Feng, or Professor Wo Feng, if you pronounce it properly. And I think it's rather obvious that Wo Feng was modeled after Fu Manchu, the Sax Rohmer character. Sax Rohmer was an English novelist. And he created this supervillain who was like a mad scientist, a crime boss, an assassin with only really a slightly mystical bent to him. And he was based on a stage character named Chung Ling Soo, who was really an American magician by the name of William Ellsworth Robinson. And he used to dress up. He shaved his Victorian mustache, and he would put on this Fu Manchu mustache, and he would wear the Mandarin, outfit and cloak and everything, and he would do his stage act, his magician act. And so Sax Rohmer based Wo Feng on him, and
Manchu. Sax Rohmer based Fu Manchu.
What did I say?
You said Wo Feng.
Sorry, Sax Rohmer based Wo Feng on Fu Manchu. And then at the end of the paragraph, it says Wo Feng is an impossibly long-lived psychic. So that was the psychic part is a little bit of I think a little bit of a flourish by Tom, because Fu Manchu, he might have been a little bit psychic. I don't recall from the pulps, but if he was, it was really downplayed. He was more these other things, a crime boss.
No, I think he was more about he had total control over his minions, who would just die for him. So it was more like will over his minions, and not so much like an actual psychic ability, I don't think.
Right. I mean,
anything I've ever seen. I've never read the Sax Rohmer. I've only watched the Christopher Lee films.
Yeah.
And how they portray him is not really psychic. It's right. He's scientifically very advanced.
Right. And that's the other important part of this passage, that Wo Feng was impossibly long-lived, and that's a reference to, that's directly lifted from Wo Feng, because Wo Feng was supposed to be very long-lived. Like at the time that he was active as a crime boss, which I guess, I don't know, the 20s, the 30s, he was supposed to have attended European universities back in the 1800s. So he was supposed to be like in the 70s or 80s or something, and yet a very virile kind of crime boss. So yeah, there's that element that was lifted. And then he sees this vision of his beloved Asia. Now, so Tom doesn't limit Wo Feng to a country. He doesn't say he's Chinese or he's Japanese. He sees his beloved Asia destroyed by a sun dragon. And I always assumed that this was a reference to the atomic bomb being dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. So this game is taking place 11 years earlier in 34, and Wo Feng is having these premonitions of the bombs being dropped. And so he reaches out to Kara, or at least he encounters her in this world between worlds, the psychic world between worlds, and they see each other, and he recognizes her as a Salum Bari. So, and Salum Bari, maybe Tom didn't mean it to be a cabal. Maybe he meant it to refer to someone who has these psychic abilities, one or the other. But anyway, he sees that. So, yeah, that's a lot of really, in those two paragraphs, there are a lot of really erudite references by Tom, well, anyway, any thoughts on that?
I had kind of wondered how Jason responded to that character, because the Sax Rohmer character is it's a European or English person, or American. Is Sax Rohmer American?
Yeah, English.
English, right? It's an English person's version of a Chinese peril. Mm-hmm. Of like the yellow peril. Mm-hmm. And Tom did base it on it, although I think he tried to be a little more sensitive about it. Mm-hmm. And certainly Tom was trying to point out that he wasn't all wrong. The villain wasn't, and I don't want to spoil much about what's going to happen, but he made the character deeper than that, is that he wasn't wrong about what he was doing. That's right. Mean, he was wrong the way he was doing it, but his realizations weren't, they were based on something that he was trying to do the right thing. So in other words, the idea that the villain in his own mind is a good guy. He's trying to do the right thing, and not everybody. There's usually very few people who are actually evil, and that was a little bit of an interesting level to bring to the game, because the game does represent something where there's definitely good and there's definitely evil, and that's the fun of it. But he was trying to make a character who was a little more nuanced than that a villain.
That's exactly right.
Antagonist, which was interesting. But Jason. I would have been interested. I don't know if you had. He never said anything to me. Like you said, he went along with it fine. And although I do think maybe his creation of the later character that he plays might have been a response to, okay, this is an actual Asian character that's being built by somebody who understands the culture a little better, which might have been the case. I don't know.
Yeah, it bears pointing out that Jason is from Malaysia and of Chinese heritage. So yeah, I always used to like to say that our gaming group back in the 90s in New York, we were like the United Colors of Benetton. We had every shade around that table. It was kind of funny. And yeah, I think you're 100% right about that. I don't recall Jason ever batting an eye at Wo Feng, thinking him sort of an offensive stereotype. But I think that's because Wo Feng wasn't exactly Fu Manchu, as you pointed out. Fu Manchu, Sax Rohmer made him a supervillain, and Wo Feng was not a supervillain. We thought at the outset that he was a supervillain, but it turned out that, he had what he believed to be a noble goal, and maybe he was going about it in a way that didn't jive with the Empire Club's methods. And so I think really what it was what happens later between Wo Feng and Kara, and the Empire Club feeling very protective of Kara. I think that's really the crux of the adversity between the Wo Feng character and the player characters, and not so much that he was evil, as you said. And so, because it wasn't an evil character, and because it wasn't a stereotype, and, he didn't render him. He says she has the vision of an aged Asian man in a suit. So Wo Feng isn't wearing like these Mandarin robes and this hat and the Fu Manchu mustache. So he's taking away a lot of the stuff that might be considered stereotype. He's using the core of the character, but he's putting in, this was the 1990s, so he's putting a 1990s spin on a 1920s character. And I guess for that reason, it didn't seem offensive to Jason. It wasn't intended to be offensive. And but I do think you're right. I think because Wo Feng played such a critical role in the story of the Empire Club, Jason later on, for his second PC, decides he wanted to let's introduce a main Asian character who's actually created by an Asian and who can be, yeah. So I think you're right.
It brought that element of the story that we hadn't really played before, which was like a different sort of story. And I think you've already gone over in other podcasts about that ending, how that ending was. And again, don't want to spoil it, but the ending of his character is very, very in keeping with that kind of story. Right.
Eastern storytelling. Yeah. Not Western tropes, but Eastern tropes. That's exactly right. All right. So the last paragraph, this brings us close to our cliffhanger. So once the Mongol warriors were defeated, the group took off in the Bellerophon for Egypt. In the air, a deadly venomous viper bearing markings on its hide that resembled a phoenix, the symbol of Wo Feng, crawled out of Sammy's bag and bit him on the leg. Now, before I read the cliffhanger line, I just want to point out that here the erudition continues, because the phoenix in Chinese is the Feng Huang. I hope I'm pronouncing that properly, but the first four letters are Feng, like Wo Feng. So his name, it has this phoneme in it from the phoenix, and the phoenix is the symbol of Wo Feng. And we often think of the Japanese meaning of the phoenix, which is resurrection and renewal, but in Chinese mythology, it's a symbol of spiritual awakening. And this is where Kara is having her spiritual awakening in this episode, where she's having a meeting of the psychic minds with Wo Feng. He's awakened to her. She's awakened to his existence. And it's a seed for her story arc, which is intertwined with Wo Feng. But it's also a symbol in Chinese mythology of eternal life. Again, Wo Feng being impossibly long-lived. And then, that, of course, does sort of hint at resurrection. Long life and resurrection are conceptually linked. So it's not far off from the Japanese conception of the phoenix, which is what we are very familiar with. But that's astounding. If that was intentional, and I have no reason to believe that it isn't, that's really amazing. He what an erudite guy.
Yeah, he put a lot of detail into this. He really did, and he was pretty excited about running it. I have no argument with that. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, and that brings us to our cliffhanger. Before I get to it, I just want to point out that Tom named this episode "The Hands of Woe," and now we know that woe he meant it as a double entendre, or rather a pun. Woe as in, woe is me, W-O-E, like agony. But also woe as in Wo Feng, the character. And he, and again, just like the other episode that he ran, To Steal a Corpse, which I said was probably modeled on To Catch a Thief. He modeled the title of this episode on a film that he was very fond of. He just found this film very amusing. It was called The Hands of Manos.
Manos, The Hands of Fate.
Oh, that's it. Yeah. Manos, The Hands of Fate.
It's a very popular episode of Mystery Science Theater.
They do show it on Mystery Science Theater. Yep.
And The Hands of Fate.
And it is kind of hilarious. It's so bad, it's hilarious. And Tom was so tickled by this movie. He would always reference it, and I did eventually watch it like years later. I'm like, what is this movie that he keeps talking about? And yeah, it's so bad, really, it's hilarious.
Really film that there. Yeah, but it is a very funny episode of Mystery Science Theater. I remember that.
I'm sure they mocked it. They mocked it relentlessly. All right, so the snake comes out. With markings on its hide that resembled a phoenix, the symbol of Wo Feng. It crawled out of Sammy's bag and bit him on the leg. Great confusion ensued, and the Bellerophon was sent nosediving over the Atlantic Ocean.